Hello, and welcome to Magic is Real, a podcast focused on exploring the fascinating world of near-death experiences, communication with spirit, and all things metaphysical and spiritual. The mission of this project is to share messages of hope and inspiration with others, and to spread the word that death is only an illusion. Thank you for being here with an open heart and mind. I wish you peace, light, and love always. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Magic is Real. Today, my guest is Bob Snow. Who is Bob Snow? Bob is a retired police captain, and he is the author of the book, Portrait of a Past Life Skeptic. I am really excited to talk with him because as he will explain to you, I really like to interview people that come from an atheist or a skeptical background who had a profound life-changing experience when, in his case, he had a past life regression, and at first was very skeptical and worked to disprove that what had happened was real, but ended up doing a lot of research. He had an investigative background. That was what he did really well. And so because of that, he really was able to dive deep and actually prove his own self wrong. So thank you, Bob, so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Oh, such a pleasure.
Well, as you spoke about, I was a police officer at the Indianapolis Police Department for 38 years, and I served a lot of capacities there. I was the chief administrative officer. I was the police department executive officer. I was in charge of the homicide branch for a number of years. Another such jobs. But interesting enough, I never really wanted to be a police officer when I was growing up. When I was growing up, from the youngest age, people would say, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I would always say a writer. I'd always want to be a writer. But anyway, but that's a nice thing to say, but accomplishing that's a different thing. So
Right.
actually, police work, I kind of fell into police work. I was in the military in the Vietnam War, and after my discharge, I was looking for a job. And my brother had joined the police department about a year before this. He said, "Hey, come on, they're really needing guys because the war was still going on then, and they're really needing guys real bad. Their choice right now is really limited." So I thought, well, yeah, good job. It paid pretty well, pretty good money, and all good benefits. So I went down and joined, and it turned out to be a very fortuitous thing because not only did I have full-time employment, but I also had lots of subject matter for writing, tons of, because I've written 20 books, and all my book, about past lives have been about police stuff. Have been either true crime or how SWAT teams operate, how do you find missing persons, things like that. But this was a little different book. But interesting enough, that people don't realize to be a writer, you just don't sit and write all the time. You have to read a lot too. And you have to read not just for your field, but for every field. That way, if you see how someone has handled something really well, you kind of want to diagnose it and understand how they do this as you do yourself. Or if somebody wrote something really poorly, you want to make sure you don't copy that. So anyway, I've been a very avid reader my whole life. So I used to belong to a number of book clubs. And one month I saw that one of the books they were offering was a book by Dr. Raymond Moody. It's called Coming Back. Dr. Moody had earlier been investigating near-death experiences, but he had a friend who was a psychologist who did past life regression therapy, which people don't know. It's where the psychologist or psychiatrist will hypnotize a patient and supposedly take them back to a past life, which many times have an effect on, they claim had an effect on this life. And actually, it's pretty effective therapy, but most of the psychiatrists and psychologists I talk to don't believe it's real. They believe that the problem is psychosomatic, and so is the cure. And so although they do use it, it's very effective. Most psychologists don't believe it's a real past life experience. So anyway, after I read this book, and it was a very well written book, kind of interesting. But at the end, Dr. Moody isn't convinced himself that it's not just his imagination or just subconscious bits and pieces put together. And that's kind of how I felt about it. I didn't really think it was anything real serious. So a couple months later, I'm at a party, at a police department party, and there was a person there. She was a child abuse detective, but also a practicing psychologist. And her and I were talking at the party, and we were just talking about various things, movies they'd seen, television shows. We go around the books we read, and I mentioned to her that I'd read this book coming back, and she asked me what I thought about it. And I kind of belittled it quite a bit because I thought at the time I thought it was really a foolish concept. I thought this is just a bunch of whiners who are wanting to blame the problems in this life on a past life, which you have no control over. In other words, gee, I may have messed this life up real bad, but it's not my fault. It's a past life. So I kind of belittled it quite a bit. I didn't realize at the time that this lady used past life regression in her therapy. She was the active user of it herself. So I think I got kind of insulting enough that finally she basically dared me to say, if you think it's so silly, why don't you try it? I'm not going to do that. No. But anyway, if I got to the point of daring and say, oh, you're scared? Now you don't ask a man if he's scared. Of course you're not. And so I finally said, at the last, okay, I'll do it. I'll show you how stupid it all is. Well, the next day, there'd been a party and I'd had a bit to drink. And the next day you wake up, you're more clear headed. I said, I'm not doing that. That's stupid. I'm not doing it. But it's funny. It seemed like from then on, I would run into this lady, the psychologist, every day almost to see. Except before this, I swear I hadn't seen her at least once a month. But now I'd run her every day, and she'd always ask me, have you made the appointment? She had given me a name and a number of a friend of hers who did past life regression. And it did, when I said, okay, I would try it. And she'd always ask me, have you made the appointment yet? And I'd always make up some excuse. Oh, I've had 2 meetings and I had to do this and I didn't have time. But it kept getting, damn, I'd walk down the hall and there she'd be. It's like, oh, God, there she is. And you'd have to come up with some flimsy excuse. Well, finally, I just got tired of it. This is silly. So what I did, I thought, well, I'm going to head, I'm going to do it. That way I don't have to, because actually at the point when I was seeing her, I was trying to get away before she saw me type thing. I'm walking the hallway. I hope she didn't see me first. So I thought, this is silly. So I thought, I will do it, but I'm going to show how stupid it is. I'm going to go there. I'm going to cooperate 100%, do everything the psychiatrist or psychologist want me to do, but I'm not going to be hypnotized. At the time, I thought I was much too strong willed for that. So I called this psychologist and made an appointment, and I asked her if I could bring my own tape recorder along. I want proof. I want to show proof that this is all a bunch of hokum, that none of it was real. So I went. So I made an appointment, and I showed up. Very nice lady, Dr. Mary Ellen Griffith, this lady's name, the psychologist. Very nice lady, very welcoming in, very nice. And I told her, she asked me why I was there. I just thought this was interesting, and I wanted to try it. I didn't say I had any kind of problems or anything. She said, okay, sit down. So I sit up, turn my recorder on, and we just start talking. So she asked me to describe some things to her, and she wanted me to use a lot of imagery. She kept saying, okay, describe to me your college graduation. And I did, and she kept wanting more details, and she would tell me about something in high school, grade school, and I could see what she's doing. She's going further and further back in my life. And I thought, I'm just kind of rolling my eyes to myself, thinking, okay, how silly this is. But finally, she said, okay, let's get started. She says, close your eyes and see if you can see a balloon. Now, I was sitting, the window was to my right, and the sun was out, and I could see a big purple blob on my eyelids. I knew what it was. So I said, yeah, I could see a purple balloon. She said, okay. So now I want you to imagine you're taking this balloon up. So again, I'm going to cooperate 100%. I'm going to do everything she asks so I can later on say, see, I told you it's stupid. So anyway, so I took the balloon. But it's funny, when I took the balloon up, it's like at the bottom of my vision, I could see little points of light. But I thought, nah, this is just glare off the floor. So anyway, we're up in the balloon, and she said, okay, now there's a handle over your head. I want you to reach up and pull it, and it will bring you back down. So we went through this about a dozen times. I mean, I would try to imagine, but nothing had happened. I mean, I'm thinking to myself, this is her daydream, not mine. Of course, that's going to happen. She was very, very gracious. We went through at least a dozen times. I said, pull the handle, go down, but nothing happened. And I'm thinking, this is just what I thought. This is just weak-minded people trying to appease the psychologist. It's not real. So anyway, she said, okay, see if you can imagine a mountain in your mind. Said, okay, I imagine a mountain. She says, now think about flying the balloon to the mountain. So this time, I think I was kind of tired of all this stuff. And I could actually imagine myself seeing myself landing on a mountain. Now, this is very fuzzy, like, imagination or daydream. I could see a log cabin. But interesting enough, the logs were going vertically rather than horizontally. One of my readers later wrote and told me that when the French built their log cabins. So anyway, she said, Dr. Griffith said, all right, now go inside the cabin. What did you see? I didn't see anything. This is her daydream. And she said, okay, imagine a meal. So I'm trying to imagine a meal and everything. And she says, sit down and enjoy yourself. She said, okay, so now we're going to leave the cabin and we'll walk down some steps into a valley. There's 12 steps. And I want you to walk down these 12 steps. I said, okay. So I'm trying to cooperate to everything I do. So anyway, I'm walking the steps and she's counting. And it was kind of funny. I almost laughed at the time because she did this 12, then go real slow. 11, 10. I think, oh God, what am I doing here? So anyway, she counting down. And there's enough. When she got to one, something really bizarre happened. All of a sudden, I was in a valley. Not that I didn't imagine I was in a valley. I was in a daydream. I was in a valley. Now I knew at the same time I was sitting in this office on a kind of a hard couch, but I could hear noise outside the window. But at the same time, I was in a valley, and this wasn't a fuzzy picture or daydream. This was vividly clear. Matter of fact, I was so clear I could see veins on the leaves of a bush next to me. And then I wasn't stupid. I know what happened. I realized I'd been hypnotized. Now, I didn't think it could be, but I knew right then. Obviously, I have been. I said, oh, so she asked what's going on. I said, I'm walking along a brook. And it's funny, the leaves moved and I could feel a breeze in my face. But I just kind of assumed it must have been the air conditioning in the room. So I'm walking on. She said, okay, now look down, describe yourself. So I look down and I see two real hairy legs and kind of gnarly feet. And I'm carrying what looks like part of a tree limb. Everybody's seen movies and TV programs. Everybody knows what a caveman looks like. And I assume that's what I was supposed to be. I didn't realize until later on, I remember the moment when I listened to the tape again, she had told me to go back to the very first life you lived on this earth, the very first one. I didn't remember that at the time, but apparently that's what she said. So anyway, I'm walking down walking down the valley, and I'm talking, and all of a sudden, it's like I could see inside the mind of the person's body I was in. I told her all of a sudden, I live here. I said, I live in a cave up on the side of the hill. The funny thing is, I didn't know I was going to say that. I had no idea I was going to say that, just blurted it out without thinking. So anyway, she said, okay. She said, go to the cave. So I didn't really walk the cave. It was like a moment blurb. And also I'm standing in front of the cave. Now, interesting enough, I walk in, and this person who lived in this cave was not terribly hygienic. I had smelled this awful stench. And I couldn't imagine where that might come from. I thought, boy, this hypnosis is really working. It's really working. So anyway, I've described the cave to her and all that. And I said, okay, I want you to go to your death. She said, I would go to your death and tell me what you see. So actually, there was maybe 2 or 3 seconds of kind of like a gray fog. And all of a sudden it comes back in the vision. And I'm not in my body anymore. I'm actually floating above the body in the cave. And I look on the floor, there's a little kind of skinny man in furs. He's shivering and coughing. I could see he was really, really sick. So I described that to Dr. Griffith, and she said, okay. Says, what did you learn this life? And again, before I thought I didn't know what I was going to say. All of a sudden, I just said it. I said, my purpose in life was to experience loneliness. I didn't have anyone in this life. I was all alone. And again, I'm flabbergasted because I'm saying this and I don't know why I'm saying it. So anyway, she told me to go out of the cave and said, look up. Do you see a light? And sure enough, there was a bright light over the valley. She says, all right, I'll go into the light. So I went to the light. Then again, there for about maybe 3 or 4 seconds, it was gray fog. Before she said, okay, now I want you to go to a life where you had someone. Go to a life where you had someone close to you. So I'm in this fog for 3 or 4 seconds. Then suddenly it's like a scene to change the scenery. And I'm walking along a street. But I don't know how many viewers remember it. And oh gosh, probably in the 50s and 60s, a lot of times movie theaters, your film would start off real blurry. You couldn't see very much as outlines. And that's the way this was. And then suddenly, click, it get real sharp. And all of a sudden I found myself, I was walking along a street in this really busy city. And the funny thing is, the sun was out hot and I could feel the sun on me. There's a real warm sun on me. And I'm walking along this street. And Darkness says, where are you going? I said, I'm going to meet a woman. Again, I'm saying this stuff. I have no idea why I'm saying it. I said, I'm going to meet a woman. She said, okay, now you better. Where do you go? I said, we go to an outdoor cafe, and I order a glass of wine, and she orders some kind of special water. So Dr. said, okay, we talked about this a bit. She said, go to 5 years forward, and what do you see? So again, I'm in the gray fog for a little bit, and all of a sudden I'm in an apartment, the hallway of an apartment, and I'm arguing with someone, who's a woman, who was apparently my wife. We were arguing about money. We were arguing about it, and I just finally get mad and walk away. And I walk down the hallway into a room, and it's an artist studio. There's pictures all over the walls, dozens of pictures hanging, and up above the whole ceiling is a skylight, and to my right is a whole wall of windows. And I describe all this to her, and suddenly I knew. And again, I didn't know, but who her body I was having, I knew as an artist. This is where I worked at. And she says, "Okay." So I described it all to her. She said, "All right, go 5 years forward. What do you see?" And all of a sudden, I'm at a party, and I have no idea. I'm apparently the object of the party. Everyone's going to congratulate me and tell me how great it was to shake my hand. And I had absolutely no idea why they were doing it, but I was the kind of star of the party. So, anyways, I described all this to Dr. Griffith, and she said, "Okay." I said, "Now I want you to go forward another 5 years. Tell me what you see." But interesting enough, I didn't want to leave. Because I mean, this guy, yeah, I could feel what this person was feeling. It was a moment of really intense happiness. He was so happy. It really felt good. I mean, how often in your life do you ever have moments of real intense happiness? Maybe it's your first wedding or the birth of a first child or something. And I didn't want to leave. She kept telling me, "Now go 5 years forward." That's the only thing about hypnosis. People seem to think if you watch tape because they can make you cluck like a chicken and do all kinds of stuff. It's not really true. You're really in control. Because again, she kept telling me go forward. And I did. She had to tell me it 3 or 4 times before I did it. So next time, so she said, "Okay." Says, "I want you to go to your death." I go to your death. So okay. So I went to my death, and I'm laying on a bed, and I'm died. Now all of a sudden, I see my body go up like a ghost. I've never seen TV program movies of a ghost coming out of your body. Nobody knows what's going to happen. So I almost rise down. She says, "Okay." She says, what was your biggest regret in this life?" I said, I regretted that we didn't have children because my wife couldn't have children. She said, "Okay." She said, "I go up to the see light." So I pass through the ceiling of this building, and all of a sudden I'm over a huge city. I mean, it's lights for to horizon to horizon. And so she said, "Okay, to go." There was a light over the sea. She said, "Go into the light." But I didn't. Again, Dr. Griffith really wasn't in control because I didn't want to. I saw myself instead flying through some woods. And I could tell it looked like fall because it was a kind of cold, blustery night, but the trees still had leaves on them. So instead of going to light, I went through the woods. And next thing I knew, I'm on the second or third floor of a mansion looking in the window. In this room, there's a big roaring fire. Nobody's in the room, but there's a big roaring fire. And there's a painting over the fireplace. Now, Dr. Griffith, I wanted to see one of my paintings before I went. I wanted to stop and see one of my paintings. It was a still life with a bottle and fruit and a big sun in the back. So finally, she said, "Now, come on, you got to go in the light." She said, I want you to go to a life when you were a woman." I thought, I remember thinking, I said, "Yeah, that's going to happen." And so again, I went to about 3 or 4 minutes of fog, and sure, 3 or 4 seconds to give you a fog. And all of a sudden, I'm come to, and I'm in the woods again. But this is not the valley. This is all level, and they were the same kind of trees. And I looked down, and sure enough, I'm in a woman's body. Now I'm laughing at myself, thinking this is really my imagination. This is really this is really silly. This is your subconscious mind bringing up stuff, make you think it's real. It's at the actually the whole experience to me at the time, I didn't believe it was anything but just hypnosis. But it was kind of fun. It's kind of like, if you can go into Disney World, other places, have the greatest rides in the world, and it's might be scary, I think, but it's not real. It's not. You're going to have virtual reality things. It may look real, it may feel real, but it's not real. And that's what I thought about this. So anyway, she asked me, "Okay," she says, "Okay, what do you do here?" I told her that I work here because in front of me was an altar of types. It was a pretty good sized structure with pillars around the side. And again, all of a sudden, I know what this person's thinking. She says, "Okay." She says, what do you do?" And I said, "Well, me and a bunch of other girls work here at the altar. We bring things down to the altar." She said, "Okay." She said, "What do describe yourself?" And I described it as best as I could. And I also told her, I said, "We all have to be, to get this job, you have to be young, pretty, and a virgin. Nobody, that's how we get to the job." And she asked me, says, "Okay, where are you at?" For some reason, again, I had no idea where I was at. I just blurted out, "We're in Greece." I had no idea why I said it. I said, "We're in Greece." She said, "Okay." So she said, "Okay, now I want you to go 5 years ahead." So again, there's about 2 or 3 seconds of gray fog. And next I see I'm in a wagon. They're being pulled by oxen. and I'm next to an older man, much older man than me, and to my right is a little girl. But I instantly recognized her as a person from this life. This is my stepdaughter, but it was the age when I had this done, the hypnosis. She was a teenager in high school, but this was her at the same age she was when I married her mother. And again, I told Dr. Griffith, well, they apparently, since I've had a child, this is my child. Well, I can't work at the altar anymore. So they sold me to this farmer. So anyway, we went to the farm, and he died real soon after we got there. So I'm all alone with a little girl. So I see myself taking her back to the altar and give the altar to work there. Now at the time, I remember telling myself, and not myself, the body I was doing, that this was the best thing for the girl because I'd be taking care of her, she'll have a good life. But I knew what I was really doing. I was abandoning her because life would be a lot easier for me if I didn't have a little girl tagging along. The funny thing is, now I was doing all this stuff. And again, to me, it's like a ride in Disney World, and it's a lot of fun. But I felt this tremendous, crushing guilt. And I think to myself, how silly this is. This is not guilt. But I felt this terrible, terrible guilt about abandoning my daughter, just basically giving her up, taking off. You know. So anyway, I saw myself later. She said, "Okay, go to your death." And I had gone to a fishing village apparently to live out my life. And I was older. I was fairly old when I died. Somehow got caught up in the nets of the fishing. I could feel myself swallowing water. I was caught up underwater in the nets. At the moment, for a second, I could taste salt water. And I thought, boy, how odd that is. But I had to, anyway, she finally told me, but I was so glad when Dr. Griffith told me go into the light. Again, I had this terrible, crushing feeling of guilt about this. And so she said, okay, she said, I want you to go into the last life you live before you were Bob Snow, the very last life you lived before this one. So I was glad. I went to the light immediately. So anyway, but again, about 4 or 5 seconds of gray fog, and I find myself, I realize I'm back in the body of the artist. The one I had been before. I knew where I was at. I was back in the body of the artist. But now at the moment, I was painting a portrait. But the interesting part was I was painting a portrait of a hunchback woman. I thought how odd that was. I mean, how many paintings of hunchback women have you ever seen? But the funny thing is, again, the session, it was so clear. I could see every single brush stroke of my painting. I could tell I was just getting ready to finish it. And I said to Dr. Griffith, I'm painting a portrait. I hate painting portraits. I really do, but I need the money. I can feel this desperate need, this person, for money. So she said, okay. I described the whole thing to her. Interesting enough, she asked me to describe the studio. And I said, well, it's got skylight, the whole roof's a skylight. The right window wall is all windows. It was, I thought, well, exactly like what I had said before. So I was in the same place. So anyway, she said, okay, just go 5 years to the future. So I go 5 years in the future, and I don't know where I'm at, but I'm having this tremendous argument with someone about my painting, that the lighting wasn't good for my painting. It was being exhibited there. We was having this really vicious argument. We went through this. And I described it to Dr. Griffith. She said, okay. She said, now I want you to go and 5 more years for it. And I said, okay. So I go get 5 years for it. I'm walking in the garden, and I hear piano music from home. I'm real close to the house. So I walk into the house, and I see my wife playing a piano with friends staying around. So again, I described this to her. She said, okay, now I want you to go 5 years further. So again, I'm in the gray fog for 4 seconds. But before the next scene come into it, all of a sudden I felt this real heaviness, sadness come over me. It was so bad. I almost felt like I wanted to cry, and I had no idea why. I kept saying she died of a blood clot. The doctor said she died of a blood clot. And I had no idea who this person I was talking about was. Obviously a person, a woman, very, very important to this artist. But again, I felt like crying. So anyway, before the next scene come on, the recorder I had brought along clicked off, and I opened my eyes, and that was it. Now I'm a little flustered now because I had thought this is all really stupid foolishness. I really didn't think I could be hypnotized, but now that I had been hypnotized, I had gone through some really interesting scenes. Again, at this moment, I didn't believe it was anything. Other than this, it was fascinating, but I believe it's just all hypnosis. So anyway, Dr. Griffiths asked me, he says, well, can you see how this relates to your present life? And really, I couldn't. At that moment, I was too flustered and confused. So I actually just made a few mumbling responses and went out to my car. And I remember I sat there for a long time, trying to think about what has happened because it really bugged me. What bugged me about it wasn't what the things that happened, but the clarity of it. It was so vividly clear. I could see the smallest thing. I could see the veins of the leaves. I could see every brush stroke of this painting. And that kind of bugged me for a little bit. So I told myself, Bob, this is just your subconscious mind breaking up old pieces of old memories, reordering them into a story to make it look whole. That's all it is. I said, go home, just forget about it. Well, that sounds good, but I could not get this out of my mind. For the next, oh gosh, month or two, that's all I think about. I would think about 50 times a day. And interesting enough, for the first couple of years after my session, if I closed my eyes, I could still see everything just as clear as I had when I was in the regression. I could still see the brush strokes. I could still see every scene as clear as I had during that. And I kept trying to tell myself, Bob, forget it. This is nothing. This was just a trick played by the hypnosis. Don't let it get you. But it's secret. But I was just totally obsessed. And I was a police officer again for 38 years. And I know what happens to people who have really serious obsessions. It very seldom ever turns out good for them. So finally I told myself, Bob, you got to do something. Because I couldn't stop thinking about it. I just couldn't. So I said, you got to do something to stop this. And I realized what I need to do is I need to find one of the two paintings I'd see, either the Hunchback Woman or the Still Life. I thought if I could find one of those, then I'd say, oh, yeah, I saw that at the exhibition. Then you realize this is all foolishness. If I see this at an exhibition, that's how I knew it's real. And then it's all solved. It's just memories brought up, reordered. It's really nothing. So I thought what I would do, I would go to the public library. Now this happened pre-internet days. Now, in those days, you couldn't just type into a search engine Hunchback Woman painting. Those days, you had to go to the library and pull books off the shelf. So what I decided to do was I go to the art section at the public library and start looking through art books. I figured these had to be at least halfway famous paintings, or I would never have seen them. I'm not an art aficionado or know very much about art. So I figured if I had seen both of these, they had to be at least fairly famous. So I said I had brought along a couple of yellow legal pads and started off knocking up, write down the book after I read it so I wouldn't double back and do them twice. And I went through every single book in the library. Now, amazingly, they had several hundred art books. It wasn't just like 10 of them I had to go through. There were hundreds of art books in the library. So it took me a whole couple months. And I went through, didn't find a single one. Didn't find anything even close to two paintings. So I didn't know what to do. So I thought, I started that, well, maybe I'll try something else. So I started going to various bookstores and then look at their art books. And they had some that were a lot newer and different in the library. And I went to B. Dalton. I went to all these different bookstores, half-price books, and all of them, and never found a thing. So now it's starting to bug me, thinking, wait a minute. Because it seemed to me at first, this would be an easy case. I'd find one of the paintings, remember where I saw it, case closed. Well, it didn't turn out that way. So finally, I didn't know what to do. I'd visit. So I even called around to a couple local art galleries and described the paintings to them. I figured, actually, the Hunchback Woman painting, God, how many could there be? But I found something interesting in them. At that time, there was no central listing of paintings. If you wanted a Van Gogh or Renoir, okay, they know where they were at. If you wanted a lesser painting, you had to basically know where it was at, or you had to keep calling art stores to see, or art galleries to see if they knew too, because there was no central listing. So I finally gave up. I finally said, what are they going to do? Okay, what I need to find out what really happened during the regression. Maybe if I really found what happened, I would know. I could explain some things. So I went to a new age bookstore in Annapolis and bought a couple books on past life regression. And I was more surprised, only that many other people had similar experiences to mine. I found out it wasn't as uncommon as I thought. But I also found one book that says self-hypnosis. You could reportedly do past life regression by yourself. Now, this sounds good. Believe me, this was a lot harder than I thought it was. I tried this at least a dozen times, probably, and only twice at this times I could feel myself going to the same state I'd been in Dr. Griffith's office. But they'd only last for a few seconds. I would see the number 1917, then it'd flash off. I did it twice. I had no idea what this was, an address, amount of money, or what it was. So finally, I told you I was the head of the homicide branch for a long time. And when I was there, we had an 83% clearance rate, which is very, very good. But that still means that every year, 17% of our murders did get solved. And it didn't get solved because you run out of leads, you don't have enough evidence. And I figured that's what this is going to be. I'm just going to have to close the case. I don't have anywhere else to look, nowhere else to check. So I thought I'll just put it on the shelf and forget about it. Well, that sounds good. I didn't. I put it on the shelf. I didn't forget about it. But anyway, a month or two later, my wife's and my anniversary was coming up. It was in April, and I said, "Shit, we were excited to go somewhere. We want to go on vacation, someplace neither of us had ever been to." And so she called me one day at work and said, "What do you think about New Orleans?" I thought, that sounds like fun. I'd never been there. She'd never been there. So we planned a trip for New Orleans. So we flew down to New Orleans and we stayed there for almost a week. And my wife is a real history buff. Now, you can't throw a rock in New Orleans that has something of historical value. So we visited the battlefield 1812. We visited all kind of plantation homes and things. At nighttime, we go down to the French Quarter, listen to the bands, have some drinks and all that. So anyway, the last day we were there, our plane didn't leave till the evening. So we had all day there. And I told her, well, because when we were going to the French Quarter, I always noticed there were lots of really neat shops down there, memorabilia stores, antique stores, and these kind of things down the French Quarter that were never open. We went down there to visit the bars. And so I said, why don't we spend a day window shopping in the French Quarter? So we did. We went down and we went to a bunch of antique stores, memorabilia stores. When we finally got to Royal Street, and Royal Street at that time was all art galleries. So we started going to the art. They had some beautiful, beautiful things. And some of these galleries are very beautiful paintings. And we started going to each one down the street, down the street. And we finally got to the very end of the street. And there's a little small art gallery there. And I walked in the door and it said modern art upstairs. It's a two-story building. My wife, a fan of modern art. I never have been. But she went upstairs. So I started walking along the main floor. I'm looking at the paintings. I don't recognize any of the paintings or any of the artists. Again, I'm not that big on art anyway. So anyway, I'm walking along looking, and I'm looking. Now I get to a corner, and there's a portrait on an easel, and I just kind of glanced by as I walked by, and it was like I read into a glass wall. It was a portrait of the Hunchback Woman. Now, I was a police officer for 38 years, and I got into a lot of scary situations, a lot of very frightening situations. But the thing about the difference is, in those situations, I'd had training and experience and knew what to do and knew what my best response would be. This case, it was just as frightening as anything I've ever been involved in at the police department. But I had no training, no experience. So I've looked at this painting, and I'm thinking, no, 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 no. This doesn't happen to people in real life. This happens on TV and the movies. This does not happen in real life. It just does not. And I'm thinking, okay, Bob, this is not it. This looks like it. This is close. It's not the real painting. But then I closed my eyes and I could still see the brush strokes. And I realized this was the painting. So next time, considering maybe I'm not really here. Maybe I'm at a nursing home somewhere or at a hospital with wires and tubes running out of me. This is just my imagination. Because again, these things don't happen. They just don't happen in real life. There has to be some logical explanation. The fact I had looked for months, I'd see this in a regression, search for months, not find it, to just stumble on it to by accident in New Orleans. Come on. There's no way. The odds are way too high. So probably for 5 minutes I'm standing in front of this painting trying to figure out what the hell's going on. There's something wrong. But what I was doing is apparently a salesman saw me and thought, hot dog, this guy must like it. You come over and tell you, he said, I bet you're thinking how that nice to look over your fireplace. Yeah, that's what I want. A pair of Hunchback Woman on over a fireplace. But anyway, I said, look, I don't know the artist. Who painted this? He said, well, I said, I come over, I have a little bio of him over here. I said, oh, good. So I looked over, and the man's name was J. Carroll Beckwith, was the artist. He said, I got a little biography of him. And I looked at it, and all of a sudden I'm getting these chills because I found 5 confirmations immediately of what I had seen during regression. One thing, there was a painting of the Hunchback Woman. It wasn't just my imagination. And there's enough. I found that he had been born in 1852. He died in 1917. I remember my time that 2 hypnosis, the 9197. And unfortunately, I told that Dr. Griffith, when she'd asked me about it, the very first regression artist, she asked me, what time period is this? And I said, it looks like late 1800s because there was gas lights and horse-drawn carriages. And he lived during the 19th century. They said he spent some time in France. I remember telling Dr. Griffith we were in France one time. And also said he'd won a number of prestigious awards. And I remember at the party. But I'm thinking, Bob, cool down, Bob. This, you can make a lot of guesses about things. This don't mean they're true. This is just lucky guesses. That's all it is. But now I knew I got some information. I have a name. I can go back to Indianapolis. I can take this case off the shelf, reopen it, and just solve it. I figured somehow I've seen Beckwith painting somewhere else. Now, the fact I found it in New Orleans is awful amazing coincidence. But I kept trying to justify it to myself. Kept saying, well, it's like 1 to 10, 20 million chance. But then again, you think about the Powerball lottery and these kind of things. They're we went to 300 million, but people still win them. So I'm thinking that's all this is. This is just a Powerball luck type thing. So I went back to Indianapolis, went to the Central Library. And again, this is pre-internet days, so I had to go into the library. So I actually talked to the librarian and told her I was researching J. Carroll Beckwith. And she said, okay, let's see what I can find for you. Well, believe it or not, there was very, very little. There was probably, when she got everything together, less, maybe one long paragraph information about him. Apparently, he was not a very famous painting, and he wasn't terribly successful. He was mainly a portrait painter because that's the only way he could make any money. He painted other things, but he couldn't make any money. He could on portraits. But anyway, I started reading the information. Again, I get this bad feeling because I keep finding confirmations. I keep like if I found out he had died in the fall. I said I thought it was fall, and he died in October. I said he died in a large city. Well, he died in New York City. When I come up to the roof, I saw a very large city. It also said that he painted portraits but didn't like them. I said that to Dr. Griffith, that painted portraits like it. He also painted portraits because he needed the money. Last thing he said, he liked to paint portraits that had a lot of color and the sun in them. And I'd seen that still life had bottles and fruit and the big sun in the painting. But again, I'm telling myself, come on, Bob, these are small things. This could be a coincidence. You could just be really lucky. Finally, the librarian told me, she says, well, we don't have much information here. You go to the library at the art museum. There's a big art museum north side of Annapolis. Go to the library. They have much more extensive information than we do. I said, okay. So I went up to the library and talked to the lady at the library. But again, I found out they just didn't have much more at all. She said that they don't, and I asked her, I said, that's all you got? She says, he wasn't that famous. I could be honest, he wasn't that good. He wasn't that famous. But anyway, so one thing noticed, one of the little things she did find me at the bottom, it said there was a little footnote that says this information came from the diaries of James Carroll Beckwith that are now held by the National Academy of Design in New York. So I thought, okay, I know what I have to do now. I'd already had 10 confirmations. I thought, no, I got to do something. So what I did is I ended up calling the National Academy of Design in New York and asked them if I could have access to diaries. They said, no. Said, we don't ever let them out. They're too fragile. They said, however, they have been microfilmed, and you get a copy of microfilm from the Archives of American Art at the Smithsonian. So I went back to Central Library and ordered the microfilm of them. So anyway, they said it'd be about 2 weeks. So while I'm waiting, I went and listened to my tape again. I wrote down everything that could be affirmed or not. And I found there were 28 things I had said that could be confirmed or not. Now, what I was looking for this time, I was really flustered because this time would work out the way I thought it was going to work out. And I'd already confirmed 10 things out of 28. This wasn't it. But again, I kept telling myself, they're not big things. They're not big. You could have guessed these about somebody. So I thought, well, what I need to do is get his diaries, read them. What I was looking for at this top point was just one denying factor. If I could find one thing about him that blatantly wasn't true. For example, I had said that we didn't have children because my wife couldn't have children. If he had 4 kids or something, then this whole thing's wrong. I mean, okay, I said that we didn't have children, but we did. So this whole thing's wrong. This is not really a real past life you're looking at. There's something garbled up here. Or I thought for example, I found out he drank wine the time he's meeting the woman in New York. He asked for a glass of wine. Well, if he's a teetotaler or didn't drink wine at all, then again, one of those things. That's what I was looking for. But otherwise, this is getting kind of scary. It was really getting because not so scary, upsetting, because it's upsetting my worldview of things. I was looking at something that wasn't turned out the way I thought. So anyway, finally, the library called me and says, your microfilm has arrived. Okay, so I run down there and I found it was 9 spools, 17,000 pages. Beckwith had started his diary at 19 and entered it every day until the day before his death at 65.
Wow, that's a lot of entries.
Yes, I found, 9 spools, a microfilm at 17,000 pages. Fortunately, I found also that they had included, he had written an autobiography. This last year of his life, 1917, he had moved to Santa Barbara, California. He was pretty sick. He would actually end up dying of endocarditis. which is an infection of the heart valves, which is kind of like a heart attack, and died. But anyway, he started it, but unfortunately, I pulled it up and it was all typed. But he only got to age 21, which didn't help me. But also found that he had pulled some pages out. Someone, or he or someone else, had pulled some pages out of the diary and typed them. So I thought, well, maybe read them. But the only thing I found though was he talked about in 1875 he was attending art school in Europe, and he spent the summer in Venice. He said, while I was in Venice, I lived on burnt eggs and wine. So again, I checked off another one. I checked off another one. So anyway, I finally finished reading all the type of thing. I found number one, he did drink wine. Number two, there was a part about his wife on October 24th, exactly 29 years before he died. His wife had a very serious miscarriage, and after that couldn't have children, and they didn't have any children. So again, I'm still looking for the one thing I'm looking for. So right now, okay, now I got 17,000 pages, and I haven't found the denying factor yet. I thought, what I need to do, I need to get some else's input. One of my biggest admonishments to my detectives when I was charged with homicide was, don't get personally involved in your cases. If you get personally involved in your cases, you lose a wide view. You get very narrow view on things. You can miss things you don't. But believe me, I was fairly personally involved in this. And my wife was also a police officer. She was a child abuse detective for a number of years at the police department. An excellent detective, good interrogator, excellent detective. So I thought, I need to tell my wife about this and see if she got some insight I don't. Well, that didn't go well. She thought I was nuts. She really did. When I explained what it was, she really thought I was nuts. And I was trying to say, wait a minute, now look what I found. Look what I found. Here's the tape. I had her listen to the tape, and look what I found. Basically, what she told me was, no, Bob, you've seen a movie or read some books about Beckwith. You just forgot them. Well, there are no books about Beckwith, none. There were never any movies about him. He was a very insignificant portrait painter. That's all it was. But anyway, says, I'll tell you what, I'll find him. So I'll investigate this and I'll tell you how you found it. Yeah, actually, I was glad to hear her say that because that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted a completely, third party into this thing that had no connection to it. And she, like I said, she was an excellent detective. So anyway, she spent about a month, but she couldn't find anything. Absolutely nothing more than I found. But they didn't discourage her. She said, "Okay, so I can't find anything. Shut up about it." Says police captains do not go talking about past lives. Police captains do not go tell you spouting off this new age stuff. So for that, she said, maybe you did find something, or maybe it is. Never mind. Nevertheless, shut up about it. And I thought about what she said. And I thought, well, she's right. This wouldn't go good for my career probably if I go spouting off this stuff. So I thought, well, so I just sent the tapes back to the Smithsonian, and so I get on with my life. So anyway, what eventually that my race longer. I was at that time. I wasn't writing books. I was writing articles for magazines. So I had written a number of magazines, a number of police magazines, and thought I had an article idea that I got approval for the magazine to write an article about line of duty deaths in police departments. What do police departments do when they have an officer killed, particularly small departments who never had this happen before. So we had just had an officer killed a few weeks before that. And so I called a friend of mine, she's a police captain who had been at the scene. And I talked to her, and I asked her, tell me what happened, what you saw, what you did. Well, while she told me about it, she suddenly told me about having an out-of-body experience during the thing. I'm flabbergasted. I'd never heard anything like this before. And she, very matter of fact about it, she said she came up and found she was the first person on the scene and found the officer. And he'd been shot in the chest with a shotgun, so she knew he was dead. There was nothing she could do to save him. But she said she suddenly realized that she didn't know where the shooter was. That she had completely exposed herself to a shooter. She said the next moment, she said, I saw myself way about 20, 25 feet above it. I see myself leaning over the body, examining the body. And she goes to describe it. I mean, I have never heard anybody say about anything like that before. So I thought it was kind of amazing. So maybe a couple weeks after that, I'm in federal court as a witness in a trial. Now, when you're in federal court, the witnesses aren't allowed to sit in on the trial because they don't want you to be prejudiced by their testimony. So me and a bunch of other police officers are in a room off the courtroom, and police get together. They're always telling police stories, try to outdo each other. So anyway, this other police captain I knew was there telling a story about when as a young officer, he and his partner had been in a drugstore buying something, and somebody come running in and said, "Officers," says, "there's some guys holding up the supermarket next door." So he said him and his partner went over there and went to the door, and sure enough, there were about 4 or 5 guys with shotguns holding up the grocery store. And one of the guys yelled, "They're cops, kill them." So he said, of course, they got their guns out and they were firing at each other. They backed out in the parking lot. He said, during the gunfight, all of a sudden I see myself way up above. He said, he said, I thought I died. And I was just reliving what happened before I died. But he told a story about having another out of body experience. So anyway, after that, I started thinking, maybe this is, well, I've never heard any stories like that ever. When I was there, I probably had 20, 25 years on that, and I'd never heard any stories like this. So I started doing some discreet, inquiries on the police department. Other people had these instances, and there was a case I come upon where some officers were called to a house. They said that they thought it was a disturbance. So I got one of the guys in and sat him down, and I told him, this is just between me and you. I won't give you your name. I won't tell you anything about it. He said, okay, we got to call this house about a disturbance. So I drove up, and this lady was running out the door, and a big ceramic plate come out after her. Now he figures this is domestic disturbance. It's the husband and boyfriend, wife, or husband and wife type thing. And he talked with me. She said, the house is going crazy. He said, excuse me? He said, the house is going crazy. He said to him, at that time, a couple of more officers were up. They went back in the house. Said things were just flying off the wall. They'd fly off shelves or off walls and smash. And they didn't know what to do. I mean, they just sit there, and all of a sudden they said this big plate or a big pitcher would come off the shelf and just crash on the floor. So they backed out of the house and called our chaplain. Well, he came to the scene, did some praying and everything, but apparently it didn't work. And I didn't realize it, but apparently every Roman Catholic diocese has a priest who specializes in this sort of thing, exorcism and this type of thing. So they called this priest to the scene, and he did some kind of ceremony, and it stopped. Now, again, but he's the guy said, now look, don't ever tell anybody who I am or I said it, because people think I'm crazy. But they also said the people that own the house begged the officers, please don't tell anybody where this is at or what happened, because we'll have every nut in America praise approach on our doorstep. So they all thought that was a pretty good idea. Well, after hearing this, I thought, wait a minute, these things happen to other people. Why should I tell what happened to me? So I reordered. I thought I'm not doing it. This would be a good book, really a great book. I think if I could get it, get enough information to make it. So I reordered the microfilm, and I had it all converted to hard copy. It right now fills up a great big box. It fills up to 17,000 pages. Fills up quite a box. Before I got into that though, I decided, well, I need to go back to New Orleans to at least get a picture of this painting. Otherwise, who's going to believe my story? I'm telling you, yeah, I got a picture of this woman. You got to, show it that it really existed. So my wife and I went back to New Orleans and went to this art store, and we got there. It was closed. Oh hell! So again, I started canvassing the neighborhood as police will do if you can't looking for something, and talked to various art stores. And I finally found the art dealer who had bought the inventory from the store. And I described the painting to him, and he said, "Oh yeah, I remember that." He said, well, "It's been sold, but it's been sold." I said, "Well, can you contact the owner? Tell him I'd like just like a picture of it and everything." He said, "No." He said, "How about I do?" He gave me a little pre-printed card to have my name, address, and phone number. He said, "But fill this out. I'll send it to the owner. And if he's interested, he'll call you and talk to you." I didn't realize at this time, but art dealers religiously guard the names of all their customers for various reasons. Number one, they don't want the people to know people have thousands or $100,000 of art. Or number two, they don't want the other art dealers to know who their best customers are,
Right.
and that's all he'd do it. So I did it, but never heard from anyone. Never heard from him. So I said, okay. So I went back to the bank, and I started reading the diary. It took me over a year. Beckwith was kind of a scribbler, and he used pencil a lot of times. So you had to go over every page, probably 5 or 6 times to see what he said. But again, this time, I'm looking for, I just want the one denying factor. So I'm starting to look, and I'm starting to look. So anyway, but unfortunately, every time I'd find something, it'd always be the opposite. Be one more little. They're almost all little confirmations of things, But lots of some of them work. But for example, I saw him. I described to him to Dr. Griffith. I told her that I have a fancy walking stick. Well, I found there's about 4 or 5 mentions in his thing of a walking stick. But again, I think, probably everybody back in them days did that. I said Dr. Griffith that I painting portrait. I need the money. Well, Beck was the biggest whiner I ever seen. Every second or third page of his diary is he's whining about not having enough money. He whined constantly about it. I remember telling Dr. Griffith, I need the money. I need the money. And that's all he whined about. Interesting enough, though, if you look at his financial status, he was actually pretty well off financially. He really was. I mean, he had enough money. He built himself a summer home up in the Catskills. So his wife, every year they go there. The opposite year, they go spend the summer in Europe. So you really couldn't classify him as being poor, but you listen to his diary, you'd never believe it. So anyway, I, so I looked on my list and I got to a point, he's talking about having a piano in his apartment and it had a house guest because I'd see my wife playing the piano. And sure enough, he said, yeah, his wife played the piano. And again, this is, I'm looking for the big one. I'm still looking for the denying factor. So anyway, he got to one point, describes his studio. He said, yeah, it's a long room. He said, there's paintings hung everywhere. The roof is the ceiling is a skylight. And the right wall is all windows, which is exactly the same way I discovered it. Now I'm starting. Now I'll tell you the truth. Now I'm getting a little funky because I'm thinking, hey, I don't know if I'm going to. I don't think I'm going to find it. I don't know if I'm going to find this for all. So anyway, there were a number of mentions in the book about drinking wine. So I thought this might be the discretion factor. I was in the depression in the late 1800s and everything. The men who drink whiskey. And he mentions in a diary that people thought that drinking his love of wine was odd. He said he spent 5 years in Europe at art school, and he kind of picked up a desire for wine. So anyway, I keep finding these one factor after another. I found out that again his wife had a miscarriage; she couldn't have children. But anyway, I finally got in the diary to December 5th, 1886. Now, before that, at the end of my regression, just before I collected my record clock, I had said she died of a blood clot. The doctor said she died of a blood clot. Now, I knew who it was as a woman, very important to back with. Well, on December 5th, 1866, his mother was in church and died of a blood clot. I think this was the factor that pushed me over the edge. I mean, you can guess a lot of things about people. You really can. You can guess and be right. You're not going to know that his mother died of a blood clot. I mean, there were only two women in his life who were really important: his mother and his wife. His mother probably more than he knew his wife, because his dad was a retail grocer and wanted him to go into retail grocery business. He wanted to be an artist, and his dad always told me he didn't know a better way to start than being an artist. But his mother had really encouraged him. She bought him his first easel, bought him his paints, and talked to his father to let him go to art school and various things. So he really dearly loved his mother. But the fact she died of a blood clot, which to me, that pushed me over the edge. And what eventually happened, I eventually were all 28 things I'd seen. Now, the point that wasn't that hard part of this whole situation. I mean, you can make some guesses. You can't get 28 out of 28. That's simply not possible. I mean, you could probably make guesses, maybe get 5 or 10 correct, but I could not. You could not get 28. So again, but that wasn't the hard part. The hard part was accepting what it meant. Okay, now I proved this. What does this mean in your life? What it meant is you have to relook at your whole worldview. Your whole worldview is wrong. All the things I was raised a Methodist. My mother, well, you have a note in the corner not to go to church. I mean, you got up every Sunday with church. And I didn't remember anything ever hearing Methodist church about reincarnation. So I'm realizing my whole worldview is wrong. That everything I thought how the world was is not. And all the people I thought were kind of weirdos and goofballs were actually right, and I was wrong. To me, that was the hardest part of the whole thing. It just really was to change that took a while. You got to change your whole worldview of how the world operates because of this. And that was tough. Now I've had a number of people ask me, what does this all mean? Phil, what does this all mean? But I told them I'm a cop. My job is investigation, and that was my job with this. I'm not a philosopher or theologian, and so I really can't give it. All I can give is what I found, and that's basically my book's about. My book doesn't enter any kind of philosophical or theological arguments. It basically tells what I found, and it's up to you, the reader, to decide what the theological or philosophical implications are.
Right. Yeah, that is incredible. Thank you so much I know you've told that story so many times, and I appreciate you giving it the energy that you did. There's so much in there, especially what really struck me that's so interesting is how also I believe spirit led you to helping you figure out this mystery because you going to New Orleans feels very divinely inspired to me. That there's so much at work. It's not just reincarnation, it's this greater thing. And that's so interesting. Also, having come myself from an agnostic and at times atheist background, it's so relatable. All those questions that you have. I've been sharing a lot that I'm a medium, but I just started doing this work in the last year and a half. And I constantly question, did I just get lucky? Did I just guess that? And there was a woman who was watching this, hi, Kathy, who I read for. She is a listener of this podcast and brought through her son that had passed away. And even afterwards, I thought, what if, I wonder how much of that is right. And she said, Shannon, you got, and it was something like 20 something things that were right. She said, I went through and I listened to
Yeah.
it back. And she's like, you had this many hits kind of thing, because it's so hard to wrap our human minds around. I also appreciated what you said about it shifted your whole paradigm. I was
Yeah.
just saying the other day that I remember when I used to think that Shirley MacLaine was a nutcase, and you're
Yeah.
like, oh, that kook. And now I'm like, she was a renegade and ahead of her time, and how brave for her to come out with this stuff and say it so matter of factly. And we all just went, oh, she's crazy. And now I know that she actually knew what was up. So
It's really
that's so
easy to
interesting.
relax, to get back, and say, well, they're just nuts. Until you find it yourself, and then it's like, ow, ow.
Yes. And in fact, similar to you, one of the reasons I began to study mediumship was to prove it to myself that it was real, because I was so
I was
interested
trying to
in
do the
it.
opposite. I was trying to prove it. Well, I was trying
It
to prove it
wasn't
wasn't real. But a lot of
right.
times in investigations, murder investigation, others, you believe it or not, but most homicide techniques, when you start a case, you have an idea who did it. You already got the case solved in your mind. But sometimes you find you're getting information, you realize I'm going the wrong way.
Yeah.
This has not turned out. You got to reverse course and head another way. You realize you were completely wrong, and it's not the way you thought. It's another person that actually did the murder type. But this, like in this case, I started off to prove it was wrong, but you get far enough along, you realize you're headed the wrong way. Hey, boy, Bob, this is right. But I always wonder sometimes if this was meant to be. I really, because a lot of times during this investigation, I had a lot of information basically dumped in my lap, come out of nowhere. I have information about Beckwith. For example, in his diary, he had talked a number of times about working on his scrapbooks, but I could not find out where I couldn't find where his scrapbooks were at. Well, I was talking to a lady who specializes in investigation of American art. Apparently, there's a lot of forgery in American art, and she's an expert in detecting forgery. And we were talking about Beckwith and Spain. She said, just out of the blue, I didn't ask her anything. She says, you know what scrapbooks at the New York Historical Society, don't you? It's one of those things like, oh, so I had to go. I actually went to New York to look at them. There was nothing in them. Actually, there were only things that are substantiated. There were like pictures of his wife playing the piano, and there was interesting enough. Back when there was an art, there was actually about 10 copies of an article. The one I was reading was in the Parish Herald, and on February 5th of 1913, where Beckwith had gotten a heated argument about the lighting for one of his paintings. And I'd see myself in a heated argument about the lighting. He'd actually taken the painting off the wall and took it home with him. Type, this guy. Except the only thing I found in the scrapbooks more confirmation. Interesting enough, also when during the investigation, I was looking. One of the sources about Beckwith, the librarian found for me, has said he died by suicide. And I thought, no, I don't remember any of that. I thought this could be the denying factor right here. If
Yeah.
he'd killed himself, I didn't see any of that. This whole thing's wrong. So what I did, I called the New York City medical examiner. Now, and I told him I identified who I was. I was Captain Snow, the head of the homicide branch, and told him I need some assistance. And he was, no problem at all. And I had told him I need a death certificate. And he didn't seem terribly surprised when I told him the man died in 1917. He sent it right to me. And it says that Beckwith died of endocarditis, which is an infection of the heart valve. Actually, he'd been in a walk on Central Park on the day he died, and he'd had a heart attack. He lived long enough to get back to the apartment. He died in his wife's arms. But this is why I think something. But I think if an ordinary citizen called the medical examiner, you may not have got the information. But being
Yeah.
the head of a homicide branch, they call him. He was more than cooperative. I'm just surprised he didn't ask why 1917. It'd certainly be an old case, but he didn't. I got a copy of his death certificate. That's
Oh,
why
that's
sometimes I
amazing.
kind of wonder if maybe I wasn't meant. You kind of wonder maybe this is what you were intended to do. You need somebody with investigative experience and someone with a little authority that you could actually get things done.
Right. And I'm echoing a little bit suddenly. One of the things that you touched on was when you first went into your hypnosis, you said it was, well, not when you saw the leaves and you saw the veins and it was so vivid, but then the rest of it just felt like imagination, right? And Is that correct? So when you started to see
Yeah,
Beckwith's life?
I just, I knew this. I knew I'd been hypnotized, but I figured this is my subconscious mind bringing up images of things. I just couldn't get over the vivid. Not that the fact that it happened, the vivid. I mean, it was so vivid. It was as clear as I'm looking now. If I look at my room now, it was just that clear. I could read the small print. I could see veins on, the leaves, on, veins and leaves and things. This minute. I, I, I never imagined the hypnosis could be that clear. I would assume
Right.
you'd see I'd assume you'd see some foggy thing, maybe see a picture or see somebody moving in the fog. But this was unbelievably clear.
The
That's
whole
what
thing.
really, because that's what really concerned me about when I first come out. Not that I didn't think I'd been hypnotized, but I couldn't believe how clear it was, how vividly clear. Again, for several years after the regression, if I closed my eyes, I could still see the Hunchback Woman painting. I could see every brushstroke. Now that's since faded. I can't anymore. But the
Yeah.
first couple of years, I could do that.
Well, that's interesting to me because I haven't ever done a professional past life regression with a practitioner, but I've tried the meditations and things, and same. I never, nothing ever really happens. I usually fall asleep, and I don't trust it. I'm like, I don't know, because people have asked me just in a class, like, who are you? And I'm like, I don't know. I guess I'm this guy. And I did come up with a name and a time, but it didn't feel real. And I just felt like I made the whole thing up. And but there was one night where I was meditating and I was listening to binaural beats. And all of a sudden, I started to sort of go into this other place. And it happened. It was so weird. All of a sudden, I was standing. It was so vivid, like you're describing. I could see every detail. I was standing. I felt like I was in a Robert Frost poem. And I saw these, I was in the snow and I saw these street lamps and it was nighttime and it was snowing. And I looked in the windows and I could see all these little candles in the windows. And I don't want to say frightened me, but I was like, what was that? And I just grabbed onto my partner at the time and I said to him, I'm like, something just happened. I wasn't I just went somewhere else. And it was like I was standing somewhere else in the snow. And now I'm wondering if that wasn't that. But the other thing that I wanted to touch on though is, yeah, it's similar in mediumship where when we talk about knowing it's real because it's so vivid. I'm trying to articulate this, but it's so esoteric to try to pinpoint. But a lot of times, for instance, when I do mediumship, it isn't I don't see a spirit. Like I don't look at you personally. I don't look at you and see spirit there. I just telepathically have a knowing of I'll just know like this is a person that's close to you. I'll just be like, I just feel there's a man named Randall to you, and I believe and I just know it. Um, and I think we often look for those moments of it being so clear. And it actually encourages me to actually try to do. I want to go to Wendy Rose Williams, who introduced the two of us, and have her do one for me. I never wanted to sort of invest in it, knowing that my past experience was it felt like I was making it up.
Yeah.
However, I thought mediumship feels like I'm making it up. And all of my teachers have told me that when you're doing a reading, you will feel like you're making it up. The way you know you're not is when the person validates that what you're saying
Yeah.
is true.
I,
So, yeah.
yeah. I was on the Katie Couric show about my book one time, and she had herself hypnotized regression. Now she's always had a big interest in steamboats and all this, and in this life, and sure enough, she went to past life, and I guess she was a steamboat captain or something. But she was saying,
Wow.
"Wait, says maybe I only seen this in the regression because I love it," type thing.
Yeah.
So how do you distinguish between the two? I mean,
I
that
know.
was her basic idea is that yeah, they hypnotized her, and she went back and saw herself as a steamboat. I know the captain or working on a steamboat, and but to this life, she's always had a very fast nature of steamboats. So again, she wasn't totally convinced simply because she wasn't sure if it was just a bleed over this life or it was real.
Absolutely. That's something that now I'm starting to see, which is so, again, esoteric and hard to grasp, but that the concept of other dimensions and there is no time and all of these sort of metaphysical concepts, when you start to realize I had that recently where I realized I was like, as a kid, I was really interested in this one like actor. And later in life, I met someone who reminded me so much of him. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm so drawn towards this person. He reminds me of that particular kid. And then I realized, what if it's the other way around? What if I already knew I was going to meet this person? And as a child, I knew that he looked familiar. And therefore, I was fixated on that person because he reminded of me of the future person that I was going to meet. And it just boggles the mind. And I love that this opens up this idea of maybe things really aren't well, what we think it is. And that there's all that stuff about, is this a hologram? Are there aliens that are just creating us, that all these different things? But it's so interesting to think about. And I have seen so many compelling documentaries. I used to not believe in reincarnation, and then I saw some very compelling documentaries about children who
Well,
know things.
believe me, before this, I had no belief in reincarnation.
Yeah.
That belief, none at all. But one point I wanted to make on this, I was very fortunate in this instance to have a person leave a diary,
Right.
that you could read. And you think, what's the odds that
I
person
know.
would leave a diary and it still be here? And I have other people ask me, okay, if Beckwith is such a no-name painter, not famous at all, why would they keep his diary?
Right.
What would be important? And that's a good question. The reason was that Beckwith, even though he wasn't very successful as a painter, was kind of a social butterfly in his day. He got out to a lot of social things, and he eventually knew all kinds of famous people. For example, he knew Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt and him went to lunch together all the time. He knew Claude Monet, the famous painter. He was good friends with him. Him and Mark Twain were actually neighbors up in the Catskills. Well, they started in the Catskills. Oscar Wilde, when Oscar Wilde came to America, he actually stayed with Beckwith in his apartment. He knew Sarah Bernhardt, the actress. Well, his diary contains a bunch of little anecdotes about these people. Matter of fact, when I was writing this book, I had a lady who was writing a biography of Mark Twain, and she knew that I had actually accessed the Beckwith diaries. And she asked me, says, I really don't want to read 17,000 pages. Did you ever find any anecdotes about him and Mark Twain in a diary? And I did. And I gave her some of the quotes from the diary. And that's basically not because of Beckwith was anybody at all. He really wasn't. He was not important. He didn't do anything world shattering, but he knew an awful lot of famous people. And he wrote about him in his diary. So people who are writers are all the time access his diary, not because they care about him, because he has little anecdotes about very famous people. And they're, if you're a writer, you want to put something in your book that nobody else has about this
Right.
person. Yeah. And that's why they use his diary. And again, I found some interesting things about Mark Twain and him that she would use in her book because of Beckwith's diaries. And that's really not because of Beckwith. That's the main reason they've been saved.
Yeah, I love that too. I also, when I was younger, I lived in Paris, France. I studied abroad and then I loved it. The minute I got there, I felt like I've been here before. I felt like I've never felt more at home anywhere. I fully felt like this is my home. And so I ended up going back after college and still had that same feeling. And I've had other like mediums say, you lived in France in another year, in another life. And it's so interesting to think how you form these attachments. Are there things uh, since this has happened and since you've continued to sort of get to know Beckwith and continue to study, have there been things that you found that are parallels between your life and his, or themes in his life that came
Tons.
up in this one? Hmm.
Tons, yes. I find you're surprised how many similarities you find. I mean, they're nothing really big,
Yeah.
but everything. But again, like a lot of my affirmations, they're small things, but they're very similar type things. You found a ton of them. It gets kind of disconcerting after a while. Like you find these kind of things. It's like what's the odds that could happen and that could happen type thing. You know. But again, it's. I suppose if you believe in past lives, I suppose you might have some carryover. Who knows? I don't know.
Right.
Again, I don't know enough about past life to know, but it would be. But it seems like you would have some carryover anyway. I need to tell you one other instance I'll tell you about. When I went to New York to do some research on my book for while I was writing it, because Beckwith lived most of his life in he went to Paris for a while. He actually was raised in Chicago. And he went to Paris to study. When he came back, he settled in New York City, and he lived there until he died, mostly in New York City. So I went there to kind of look and see if I could find the places he'd been. Well, there's nothing left. And he lived there in the late 1800s or 1900s. All the buildings are gone.
Yeah.
everything's gone. But I did find, like, I got this death certificate. At the bottom of it said he's buried in Kensico Cemetery, which is in Valhalla, New York, which is a suburb north of New York City. And then while I was studying that, when I was doing my research, I thought, how cool would it be to go visit your own grave?
Yeah.
I mean, come on. But at the same time, it's a little spooky too, to think about it. But I thought, so the last day I was there, I got on a train and went up to Valhalla, New York, to where he's at. So, but Kensico Cemetery is a huge cemetery. A lot of famous people buried there. It's a beautiful, beautiful cemetery. Lots of big, gigantic mausoleums and stuff. Very wealthy people. So I went to the office and I asked him, where his grave is. I'm looking for Carol Beckwith's grave. They look it up and they give me a map and drew the way to get there. So it was a really beautiful day there. So I walked through there, admiring all the beautiful parts of the cemetery. But anyway, when I found Beckwith's grave, I could see it. As I walked up to it, I got this terrible anxiety attack, and I have no idea why. When I first become a police officer, you're brand new. You go into a really scary situation. You have the real anxiety attack. I always found one thing that happened. My left knee started shaking real bad. Just my left knee, not my right. My left would shake when I got into a really scary situation. When I started walking to Becca's grave, I could feel my heart pounding. I could feel my heartbeat. My left knee was shaking. I had electricity running my arms. I thought, I'm thinking to myself at the time, Bob, this is stupid. There can't be no spirit, ghost or anything here. Any spirit was in him is in you. So it's not there. But I could not get over this anxiety attack. So I actually walked up, looked at the grave, and I took up a couple of photos for my book. But I could not get rid of this anxiety attack. It was just horrific. I mean, it was just like I was terrified, and I have no idea why. So finally, I see there were men working on some hedges close by. So I went over to ask them to take a picture of me at the grave. Just number one, for the book. Number two, show I wasn't scared. Men are. But anyway, but finally, when I walked into the grave, the attack was gone. It was gone. There was no problem. Once I got about maybe 10 feet of the grave, it was gone. So I asked the guy. So I went back over the grave to him take a picture of me, and the anxiety attack come back again. Terrible. My hands are sweating. My knee was shaking. I could feel electricity run up my arms. My heartbeat. I have no idea, and I never have figured out why. I've had a number of people try to explain why it was, but I haven't figured out why. Maybe you're not supposed to do that. Maybe you're not supposed to visit the grave of your past life. I can't explain it. I don't know why it happened, but it was awful. It was I had this terrible anxiety attack when I'm standing at his grave. But the only thing in there is a body. Any kind of soul or spirit should be in me. So there shouldn't be anything there to be frightened of. I kept telling myself that there's nothing, but my body didn't want to listen. It just kept going through the same anxiety attack. And I don't know why. I have no idea why.
Well,
and I've had several people try to explain things, but
yeah.
I still don't understand why.
Well, my understanding is that when a soul reincarnates, it doesn't mean you have one higher self. That's the soul that you come from. But it doesn't just recycle, right? Because if he's in you, let's say I'm his granddaughter and I see a medium and she's still able to bring through his spirit and he still has his same personality, his same likes and dislikes, and he can validate things that happened in our life together. That's because you can be, it's one of those things that doesn't make sense in our earthly plane. But Monica the medium, my teacher, describes it as there's a clementine fruit, and the fruit is your higher self, your higher soul, and it has little wedges in it. It has little pieces. So each piece of that clementine is a different lifetime or person. So you can actually be existing as different people at the same time, but you're all part of the same source energy. So just because his soul is reincarnated into you, he still maintains his own identity, which is confusing, but it isn't in the realm of the other side. It's just we can't wrap our brains around it. So it could be your anxiety attack wasn't necessarily a negative energy, but mediums, we get anxiety just from interacting with spirit in general, because it's a sensation that's foreign to us, and we're absorbing other people's energy and memories and all of these things, and it could trigger a panic attack. You have your own Bob soul, and then I would almost say it's like you share a soul, which isn't quite it either. But he's still who he is and you're still who you are. So when you go to the other side, hey, you might even run into him up there, but you're part of the same source, higher soul, higher spirit.
Well, I certainly don't know enough about to understand it, but I just know it was a terrible time there. But finally, when I get 10 foot in the grave, it's gone. It completely goes away. But I decided that's the last time I visited this grave. That once was enough.
Yeah, that's so cool that you did. Now, since then, have you done any more past life regressions for yourself to sort of delve deeper and see what
Well,
else
actually,
might come up?
I when I was trying to find about what this is all about, I actually went to Dr. Griffiths for a second regression, and I went to the same state that was the first one. Everything is very clear, but every time she says, "Go back to the life of the artist," nothing happened. And she kept saying she did it maybe a half dozen times. She says, "Go back to your life." Nope, and that wouldn't happen. She told me afterwards that already know everything you need to know. Now,
Yeah.
at the time I didn't think that was so, but apparently she turned out she's right. I went back some other lives and that during that for very vivid lives, but they were so far back in history. There's no way to. I saw myself as a Greek teacher, as a Chinese warrior, a medieval monk, but they were all very vivid. But there's no way you could verify these. It's just you don't know. You could have read about it in books or in the movie too. So there's no way you could really
Yeah,
not
there's no way to
unlike Beckwith.
confirm.
There's no verification of them. Now I did
That
also
yeah.
have an idea that after the Beckwith book came out, maybe I would investigate other people's regressions. I thought, well, I get some other. So I actually gave a speech at the International Association of Past Life Research and Therapies. It was a group of psychologists and psychiatrists who use past life regression therapy. I gave a speech at their national conference. And I asked a bunch of them there if they would send me. They had any cases that looked like it's verifiable. Please send them to me. I did get a lot of different cases, but they are not verifiable. I find most people, they say, like one guy he was a farmer named John in Iowa in the mid 1800s. Okay, that was mostly all they had. It's like you never get anything substantial, nothing you can really dig into it and see if this is really true. Very seldom you ever get the full name, and most times it's just mostly fuzzy stuff. They say most people wouldn't see it really clearly. I had one case I remember where a sister somehow got in a lake, was drowning, and her brother jumped in to save her. The person was seeing was a brother, and he drowned too. But there was no location, where you could actually look up news stories about this actually happening type thing. I had no real location for it, so it was that kind of thing. I probably got 50, 60 cases from psychiatrists. There's none that you could really put grasp on. I was so fortunate with Beckman to find the diary, to have the diaries, to actually be able, because a diary, if you think about it, he kept his diary going until he died at 65. You get a glimpse of every day of a person's life, every single day. Then, of course, the problem is, of course, in a diary, you only make a few sentences about something that is really important, because all you need to do is remind yourself of it, then you remember what it is. That was always, he'd leave some tantalizing type of little excerpt. You wonder if it's just what's he talking about type thing. But I was very fortunate to have the diary because I was able to do it. I was able to confirm everything I had seen. But it was, again, it's one of those things where very few people have that. I found very few people get regressions. I didn't realize what I had apparently is called a full sensory regression. I could say I could taste, smell, feel, and see, and hear. And apparently, that's pretty rare. I didn't realize that was fairly pretty rare because
Which
again,
is so
I'd never done it before.
interesting. Yeah, and it's so interesting that you were a skeptic, and that's the other thing. I've always been skeptical that it would work for me, not because I'm a skeptic but because I tend to have a very logical mind, and I'm like, "You're now going deeper." No, I'm not. I'm aware that I'm not. And I always wondered if they could hypnotize me because I'm a little too self-aware and a little too skeptical of things and cynical about things in a sense. So I really love hearing that that happened for you. And it does make me curious about trying it. And I want to know too, how has this whole experience changed your entire worldview, your perspective on things, and what else has it opened up for you?
Well, the thing about again, that was the hardest part, not accepting what I'd found, but what it means. But really, if you think about it because like in homicide, sometimes in these cases, you got a 3-year-old child beat to death by their parents. Now you think, if you believe in the Judeo-Christian idea, this is the only life you get. What's the point? What's the
Yeah.
point of a person or 3 years old? I've had infants killed by parents type thing. You think, what was the point of this life if the person only got to experience a year or 8 months or 6 months or 2 years of life? What was the whole point of it? There was no real point to it. But if you look at the world of reincarnation, it really makes sense. There's a fairness. For example, I suppose you're born in this world with a terrible handicap. You go through your whole life with this terrible handicap that other people don't have that really stops you from doing anything important. You think, where's the fairness? Where's the fairness in that? Why would God suddenly pick you to get it, but leave everybody else fine? Or example, you got two babies going to be born. Okay, one of the mothers is a crack addict, and the other is an upper middle class person. How does God decide who gets which one? Well,
Yeah.
gee, I like you. You get the middle class. I don't like you. You get the crack addict. But if you look at the reincarnation viewpoint, the world's very fair because everybody gets their chance to be Donald Trump. Everybody gets their chance to be an untouchable Calcutta. I mean, everybody has the bad lives, but everybody has the good lives too. Because
Hmm.
if you look at Becker's life, he had a really pretty good life. He never was really wanting for anything. He never had any real bad things ever happen to him, really. I mean, he died and stuff, but I mean, nobody, he had no traumatic things happen during his life. He had a really pretty easy life because again, his dad was a wholesale grocer, pretty successful. So he was raised in some very good circumstances when he grew up. And again, he was pretty well off company money wise. And even though he whined constantly, he wasn't. He really was. Again, if you can afford to build a house in the Catskills and go to Europe every year. Matter of fact, one time I think I'd read somewhere, but he was whining in his diary that they were so poor they're down to two servants. Now you think, how bad? You're down to two servants. Yeah, you're really
Yeah,
bad.
you
You're
have
down right. You're in bad shape. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Exactly. I yeah, I guess yeah, I think it's interesting because I know I've sort of had a spiritual awakening halfway through my life that I now see everything so differently. And I wonder, do you also? I mean, I also started out, I've said this a million times on the show, but I'll tell you, I started out as a criminal justice major. I wanted to go into forensics and homicide and realized that no, I just wanted to be an actor. I didn't really want to, I don't really have the constitution for that kind of, first of all, I don't even have the energy for that schedule, but I was so fascinated by that whole world. And that's interesting when that was when I was more of an atheist and more of an agnostic. And as I've expanded, I can't even watch anything. I used to be a true crime junkie. I can't even really listen to it or watch it very often anymore. As I've started to see the world through a spiritual lens, I see things so differently now that I have this. That's why this is called Magic is Real, because I'm starting now every day. I'm just like fascinated by the world because I now see it isn't just what we see here. There's so much more going on. And so it feels like a kaleidoscope, and I'm excited every day to explore it. And I wonder if you've had sort of a similar feeling in terms of, wow, there's so much more going on here. And especially, being retired, it's like you want to have that, um, you got to have your, like, you're now a writer. I mean, you've been a writer, but this is time for you to focus on your work. So how has this changed just sort of your everyday life?
Well, I mean, again, the world is a nicer place than I thought it was. When I was a
Yeah.
police officer, the world was not a great place. I mean, for homicide detectives or any regular police officer, you deal with a lot of bad people and bad situations. The world looks pretty miserable. But if you look from a reincarnation point of view, the world's, like I said, it's a very fair, very fair. Everybody, like I said, you might have bad things happen in this life, but next life you won't. Next life you could be a really good, comfortable life, I think. But it's interesting because I've had people ask me, but if I believe in astrology and crystals, and I tell them they seem stunned. I tell them no.
Yeah.
Hey, do you believe in angels and this stuff? No, simply because I didn't believe in reincarnation. I thought it was phony and baloney until I proved to myself. Now, if you could prove to me with the same level of proof I have that astrology is real, or angels are real, or crystal power is real, then I'll believe it. But I've still got the hard-headed police outlook on that. I really, because people seem stunned sometimes. I won't believe these other new age ideas, but I wouldn't have believed in reincarnation. But I got it proved. I proved to me. It got proven to me that it's real. But again, I wouldn't have believed that if it hadn't. And that's why people are always funny because they just think, "Oh, you got to believe all these really things." No, I don't. I'm sorry. Prove it to me, and I will. That's what
Yeah.
comes from 38 years of police work. That's what comes. You
That's
prove it to
smart.
me.
I think it's smart, and that's why I like to have people on the show who are grounded and who have an ounce of skepticism and who are relatable in that way. And one of my best friends is a Christian, and she asked me the other day, she's like, "How do you not?" She's like, "I don't get why you believe in all this, but you don't believe in Satan." And I said, "I'm not saying Satan doesn't exist. I just haven't seen proof of it myself. I said, I've had proof that I can communicate with the other side. It's enough proof now for me to, after doing like 100 something readings, I'm like, all right, now I'm starting to believe. And it took like, I mean, it took lots and lots of readings for me to be like, okay, it's definitely real. It's definitely real. But I said, it's not that I am saying I don't. I just can't say that I do because I have had no experience with it. I haven't seen it with my own eyes. I haven't experienced it. So that's all. I don't, and I'm skeptical sometimes about astrology and those kinds of things. Um, I still follow it. I'm still interested in it. But I definitely think it's very smart to keep an open mind and also when I say things like reincarnation, it's the Clementine analogy. I believe that. I don't know that that's the truth, but that makes sense to me based on everything the information that I've gathered from doing my own research and experience. So you're right. When you're an investigator, you need to see the proof, and it doesn't even have to be it, proof sometimes isn't going to be proven in a court of law, but I can tell you when I'm communicating with spirit, I know how it feels. A friend of mine said the other day, but I'm very skeptical because you could just be doing a trick. I said, do you think I didn't ask myself that every time I did a reading? Is it some kind of a party trick? Am I reading their energy? Am I watching their eyes? Am I assuming things about them? Sometimes that happens
Yeah.
because we're human. But I said, but once I started to really get into it, I'm telling you, I said, I feel spirit and it is a different feeling than I've ever felt before. And when I'm right, I feel even more of the spirit energy. And when the person says, yes, that's correct. And I was reading somebody and I said, he's showing me, it was her young husband who passed. He said, he's showing me an old cereal box. It's a kid from the 1950s. I kind of see like a Christmas story vibe of like the 1950s. And this kid is collecting prizes from a cereal box. She said that was a hobby of his. He collected those old timey cereal boxes with prizes. And I was like, how would I ever know that? How would I even think of something? I've never thought that in my life. And I said, I'm not here to prove it to you. I just have to tell you that that has happened 100 times or more. And that's why I believe. And I still can't tell you it's real.
But
I just believe it is.
but unfortunately, it's only proof to you,
Yes.
not to anybody on the outside say, yeah, you know, is it true or not? You believe it is because it happened to you.
Yep.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I don't know that it's true. I just have faith that it is.
Because in my book, one time I appeared on a TV program called Proof Positive. I was at work and somebody called me and said, "We'd like you to appear on our program. It's a new television program, Proof Positive." I said, "Okay, I'd like to appear on it." So we want to give you a lie detector test on national television about your book. Now, I agreed to it. I didn't want to. Now,
Yeah.
people say, well, why wouldn't you want to if it's true? There's a really good reason. Lie detectors are only about 80%
Yes.
at best, 80%. Now, people don't know that. We use them normally, police officers use them mainly as a psychological, not a real proof gathering tool, as a psychological tool. We get a case, he's lying to me. I know he's lying to me. He knows he's lying to me, but he won't
Hmm.
admit it. You, you put him on a lie detector test, say, you're lying. Most of them say, you're right, you got me,
Yeah.
type thing. So anyway, they want me to take a lie detector, and I was really kind of, I was not that I was nervous about everything was true or not true, but it means one out of every 5 questions the lie detector person asks you, they're going to get it wrong. They're going to say you're telling the truth or you're lying, or more worse than me, they're going to say you're lying when you're telling the truth. Now, if you're on national television and he says I'm lying, what's the viewer going to believe? They're going to
Right.
believe, oh, this is just a technical error. No, they're going to be lying. I took it and I did fine, but it was kind of a scary moment to have to go on TV and take a lie detector test. And
I'm sure.
funny thing, you're supposed to be very calm during a lie detector test. They put you in a quiet room. I'm there with cameras and
Yeah, you're on
directors.
TV.
Yeah,
You're not a
I'm
professional
television.
actor.
Yeah, yeah. It was a hoot. But again, I passed it without any problem. But it's one of those things where, wow, I don't think I want to do that again. Only because you have more. Because I've had people tell me later, "Would you take a lie detector test?" No, only because the more tests you take. I actually took 2 of them, by the way, not just one. I took 2. The more you take, the more likely you're going to run into a statistical error. But you're going to run into that 80% thing eventually. The more tests you take. 2 is fine. I took 2. In fact, 2 is fine. I don't really take any more. I'm really afraid I would. And
Right.
again, the audience is they're going to think, he's lying, type
Right.
thing.
And yeah. Well, what do
But
you work?
I did take 2 and pass, so I feel good about that.
Yeah. Well, I'd love for you to share. What is it that I know that you're doing a lot of writing now.
Yeah.
What are you working on now?
Well, actually, Beck was the only book that's not about police work. I write books on police procedure, how to find missing persons, SWAT teams, various other, how SWAT teams operate, what they do. They're all the place, all about police work stuff. So I'm working now on the second edition of a book I wrote a long time ago. It was actually one of my better selling books, so I wanted to update it to the present day because all the technology I think I taught my book actually it was kind of interesting because the book was I wrote the book in 1995. Up to last year, the book was called SWAT Teams, and up to last year, I still got royalties on it from 1995 up to 2020. The last year was the first year I didn't get any royalties on it, so I feel pretty good about this book. I really did. So I
Yeah.
thought I need because the technology in 1995 is so antiquated now that I wanted to write a second edition and update all the technology of what they can do now to what the SWAT teams could do then. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm presently working on.
Well,
It's
oh, go
no,
ahead.
no, sorry. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say again, thank you so much. I think it really is important to have people share these stories who are skeptical, who have a healthy dose of skepticism, who come from a logical background, who are clearly extremely intelligent and very grounded, to share these extraordinary stories, because I think that can sort of help get the word out to more people that, hey, it's worth exploring, it's worth thinking about. And as we've said, it's not our job to convince anybody.
No,
I've said that it's not, I don't need to convince anyone. I'm just sharing something that I hope will bring some hope and spark some interest and be interesting. And I think that it's really great that you're doing this work, and also coming out with this story as somebody who is regarded in your field as law enforcement. I think can probably be a little bit uncomfortable, but I just commend you for stepping out of your comfort zone and and sharing and allowing it to be explored, because I think as we progress, more and more scientists are starting to incorporate the metaphysical, say paranormal. I don't think it's out of the norm at all, but we think of it as something we don't know. So I just want to thank you so much
thank you.
for yeah, my pleasure. And I also just want to say thank you everyone who's here listening and who continues to support the show. If you want to see more content like this, like, subscribe, share with like minded friends. You can see how to support the show in the description. And again, it is Bob Snow. And the book is called Portrait of a Past Life Skeptic. Where can you get the book?
Yeah, on Amazon
On
or
Amazon.
Barnes and Noble, anywhere. Yeah,
Fantastic. And I will have links below in the description. So I wish you all a beautiful week, evening, day, night. And again, thank you for being here. And thank you, Bob.
again, thank you for asking me.